Okay, hi everyone. I'm here with Daniel Pinchbeck, who is a prolific author and amazing, generally inspiring person on this planet. Uh, he is the author of Breaking Open the Head, a psychedelic journey into the heart of contemporary shamanism. Also, he is the author of 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, and he's an author of Notes from the Edge Times, as well as his his one of his latest books, which is How Soon Is Now, and then another book which he's just published, which I've been reading right here, and that is 2012 Revisited, Prophecy and Transformation at the End of Time, which is I'm absolutely gripped by. Daniel is also a co-founder of the web magazine Reality Sandwich and Evolver.net, and edited the publishing imprint Evolver Editions with North Atlantic Books. He was featured in the 2010 documentary 2012 Time for Change, directed by João Almarim and produced by Mangusta Films. He is the founder of the think tank Center for Planetary Culture, which produced the Regenerative Society Wiki, which I would love to hear more about myself. So, hi Daniel, welcome.
Hey there, thanks for having me, Jody.
My absolute pleasure. And I've been following you for 2 or 3 years since I first came across you somehow, and really imbibing your discoveries and wisdom. And I think I was particularly attracted to your information and ideas around 2012, because that's something that's been a major thing for me. You know, what is happening in our age? Is there a shift in consciousness? How can we negotiate this? How can we process this in our lives? What does it mean for humanity, the new age, etc.? And, how can we kind of relate all this to our daily lives?
Those are big questions.
Such big questions. And I know you speak around the world. Your Mind Valley talk had a lot of views, and I think you've probably done more than one. But I think it's very much you're speaking to the sort of zeitgeist of the times, and also your interest and kind of experiences with psychedelics are, I think, revelatory, and what you speak about with the Iboga, for example, and of course the transmission of Quetzalcoatl, which I just had a read through, and I'm blown away by that. That was such an amazing transmission. Yeah. So how are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm here in Vienna with my fiance. We're chilling out.
Fabulous. I hear it's a beautiful city. Never been myself.
Yeah, it's nice and sunny.
Yeah. I'd love to know what you're working on at the moment, and what's going on for you.
At the moment, I'm helping curate a conference that's going to be in San Francisco in March called PAWA, PAWA.life.
Okay.
We're going to have like indigenous representatives from the Amazon, and we're going to have people speaking about plant intelligence and technologies and sacred architecture and so on. So yeah, it should be really, really fun.
Sounds epic.
Yeah.
Sounds totally epic. Yeah. So I'd like to know, I mean, I've just read most of your book about the 2012 Revisited, and I'd love to know your thoughts about, for example, ayahuasca is something that's getting a lot of attention. It's something that people are doing. Plant medicine is very in. It's sort of trendy. That's a kind of a horrible way to kind of think of it, but in some ways it is, and it's getting well known, and it's becoming something that's in the mass kind of psyche. People are talking about this as an option that you can, look into yourself, get insights, and evolve your consciousness to some extent. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, actually, you mentioned some books that I've written, but there's a book that actually I wrote that just came out in September last year, that I wrote with a young woman anthropologist, Sophia Rockland, called When
Yeah.
Plants Dream. And that book is totally like an overview of the whole ayahuasca phenomenon, which I've also written about in my other books. Like my first book, Breaking Open the Head, came out in 2002. And at that time, people really were not talking about psychedelics as they are now.
No.
Particularly where I was in New York and I was in the media there as a journalist, and people would just laugh at you or scoff at you if you brought up psychedelics seriously. So I think that book, which was really an effort to reconsider the visionary experience and the psychedelic experience from different angles, like philosophically and culturally and metaphysically, helped to begin to kind of like shift the discourse around psychedelics in the mainstream. And yeah, I wrote about it again in the 2012 book. The first book I'd explored the indigenous practices with a group in Ecuador called the Sequoia. In 2012, I was mainly writing about work I did with a religion from Brazil that uses ayahuasca as its sacrament. It's called the Santo Daime,
Yeah.
which has been, growing kind of robustly around the world. And yeah, and so then in the new book, When Plants Dream, it's really more of a journalistic research effort where we're really overlooking the whole phenomenon, the history of it, the origins, the legal aspects, the sacramental use, the healing, scientific aspects. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Interest in ayahuasca is growing rapidly around the world. People are having really transformative experiences. People are having healing experiences, sometimes difficult, occasionally traumatic experiences. But yeah, it's a powerful new ingredient in the global soup.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, when you speak about healing experiences, are there studies being done, like that are sort of scientific? Is that happening with people?
Yeah, it's been a little bit slower. I mean, basically, I would say starting about maybe 10 years ago now, for a long time, modern civilization or would not allow basically all the major psychedelics were made illegal in the 60s, and so they were repressed both legally, but then also kind of culturally, and even in terms of medical research and so on. So we lost a whole generation of study and exploration of these psychedelics compounds. In the last 10 years, that's come roaring back. But ayahuasca has not been studied as much as, for instance, psilocybin. Partially, it has to do with the dosages. I mean, you can measure, you chemically synthesize psilocybin, you can measure it really, really exactly. So a lot of the initial studies have been using psilocybin for obsessive compulsive disorder or end-of-life anxiety, or, then we've had MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Those have been incredibly successful to the point where it looks like, at some point the U.S. soon is going to have to legalize that as a treatment tool. So
Oh,
ayahuasca
really?
has. Oh yeah, there's a group called MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, that is, I think, now running phase 3 clinical trials. The FDA has fast-tracked MDMA as a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder because they've been working with, veteran populations who have sort of treatment-averse forms of PTSD, they've tried all these drugs, they haven't gotten cured, and they're finding that with the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, in 3 sessions, there's something like a 60% cure rate of the PTSD, and they don't even need to keep taking all of their other substances. And the same types of effects are being indicated by ayahuasca, but
Yeah.
it's not, as I said, it's not, for various reasons, it's not as easy to study it clinically. But for instance, there's a movie that just came out called From Shock to Awe, which follows a bunch of Iraq war veterans as they work with ayahuasca in a group in Florida. And basically they have tremendous, experiences, and they overcome their PTSD, and they show you these huge cabinets full of psychopharmacological drugs that weren't working on them. And then they're like, no, I don't take any of that. I'm totally back to myself.
Really?
Yeah. From Shock to Awe.
From shock to awe. And where can people watch that?
I mean, I think if you just looked it up on YouTube, you'd find it or whatever, or, Google. I'm not sure exactly where. But then we cover the same type of material in the book, and we look at different studies. And, there's indications that ayahuasca is beneficial for many, many, mental health situations, even eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and so on.
Wow. Wow. That's great news. And So for example, with ayahuasca, do you see that as something that could be available in the future, for example, in the UK on the NHS? Is that, at all a possibility?
Yeah, well, I
Based
mean, of
on
course, it's totally possible. The problem is that the UK still has quite regressive drug laws, and now you even have a more conservative government.
yeah.
So the likelihood of that being approved is in the near term is not so great. In the U.S., there's been now kind of a precedent-setting legal cases. I mean, the history goes back to the 1990s when the federal government wanted to take protection away from the Native American Church, which uses peyote and so there ended up being a case that was lost at the Supreme Court,
Okay.
where the conservative Supreme Court tried to take the right to use peyote away from the Native people. And then that led to a huge uproar that led to Congress putting in place an Emergency Religious Freedoms Proclamation Act in, I think, 1993. And then that was the basis for an ayahuasca case. The União de Vegetalis is one of the religions from Brazil that uses ayahuasca as its sacrament. They were basically raided, and all of their tea was taken. But the head of the church, Jeffrey Bronfman, is from a very wealthy family, so he had the funds to fight the case to the Supreme Court. He actually won a Supreme Court victory where the use of ayahuasca for the União de Vegetalis was protected as a religious sacrament.
Okay.
Based on that precedent, then in Oregon, there was a case at the federal level for the Santo Daime being allowed to use their ayahuasca, which they call daime, as religious protection.
Yeah.
So basically, since then, it hasn't really been challenged much in the U.S. And then some places are now even more publicly promoting ayahuasca use. So there's one called Soul Quest in Florida, which has taken advertisements out on Facebook. They've been approached by the DEA, but up to now there hasn't been any legal action against them.
Really?
So yeah, so the U.S. seems to be tacitly, and also even though we have a very horrible, despotic, right-wing government, because one of their strains is libertarian, there is the potential within that to legalize psychedelics, or at least decriminalize them. And you even have people like Peter Thiel, who's one of the main, most famous investors in Silicon Valley, who is a Trump supporter, who's been a Trump's tech advisor, but he's also a major investor in new companies that are seeking to use psychedelics as treatment tools.
Okay.
Like Compass, for instance.
Wow. So things are happening.
Yeah, a lot of things are happening.
Yeah. God. Right. I'm surprised at how far things are progressing there.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
There's a lot of momentum, positive momentum behind the whole psychedelic movement right now.
Yeah, that's huge. Gosh, this isn't really covered in the media, so it's.
Well, that's not quite true, to be honest. There's tons of stories about it, actually. Yeah, I don't know. You just haven't done your research, to be honest.
It's certainly not all over the pages of the newspapers in the UK, anyway.
Well, I mean, there's been quite a. I think you'd be surprised if you did a little research. You'd find there's actually really a lot of coverage. More than you would imagine. I mean, microdosing. If you look at, I'm sure if we just did a search on Guardian and ayahuasca, I'm sure we come up with 10 articles.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't hear much, out there in the big news stuff. I don't hear much discourse about it. So I'm kind of wowed, really, that there's so much happening behind that you're aware of and everything else.
It's all in the book too. The Plant Stream. Yeah.
Okay, definitely got to read that then.
Yeah.
Regarding Quetzalcoatl, transmission of Quetzalcoatl, in the book that I'm reading at the moment, I mean, you lay it out there, and I guess you obviously put it in your Return of Quetzalcoatl book as well. That is, it's a profound transmission, and obviously you speak about it was this an entity, a consciousness that kind of downloaded to me, that spoke to me, or is this just part of my psyche? I'm curious, like, how that is for you now, and do you have any kind of, in your daily life, do you have any more relationship with that kind of Quetzalcoatl? Is it around in your, does it does it does it talk to you? Does it speak to you now, or is it just something that happened in the past that that you have in memory?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, well, first of all, I mean, if we look at the history of scripture and religions and so on, or the history of kind of occults, visionaries and so on, this whole thing of a voice that speaks to somebody from outside is a pretty common, like, archetypal experience. That everybody from Moses to Aleister Crowley to the poet Yeats's wife, to Muhammad, to Joseph Smith and the Mormons. I mean, it's something that seems to happen to people
Mm,
when they pursue kind of mystical, spiritual insight or whatever. And so you have to be careful because and often these voices which have spoken through people. There's a very interesting book by Julian James called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And he talks about how maybe originally we experienced what we now see as our self-consciousness as a voice that spoke through us from outside, and then this somehow became integrated as our ego over thousands of years. So it's actually a common experience, and it's not something that you can totally trust. These experiences seem to happen, and it does seem to be an influx of archetypal material from what Carl Jung talks about as the collective unconscious.
mm,
And then you have to assimilate it and kind of integrate it and sort through it and so on. Like, to me, it seems to me that what I received and transmitted still seems to have kind of a high truth content. And I think one reason I wrote that book was that, I had that original transmission in 2003, and then that book came out in 2006. And then, if anything, the things that were discussed and prophesied in that book seem, if anything, more relevant today. In that we do really seem to be moving towards, we're deeper in like a pressure cooker, where a lot of what we took for granted, seems like it's being dismantled, taken away from us,
mm,
threatened. So yeah, I wanted to go back to it and think if I really still resonated with it and what the meaning was. And I could even go deeper, into that exploration, to be honest. But I haven't really had like an ongoing relationship to that same other consciousness. I mean, it
mm.
does, but on the other hand, it does feel that it's still with me. Yet I can't say that if I'd had other visionary downloads like that one, I would have, written them up and reported them. So yeah, so it's kind of like a both and answer in a way. But yeah, I mean the deeper questions. When I wrote How Soon Is Now, which came out in 2017, that book took me like 10 years to write. I was really thinking about what would be a kind of systemic design solution that would kind of allow us to, continue on the planet, particularly in such large numbers. Because at the moment we're seeing with the depletion of resources, the acceleration of climate change, we're really endangering our future to the point where we could easily go extinct, even in a shorter period of time than anybody is really discussing.
Mm,
Um, so I was thinking about what types of systemic changes would be needed in terms of how we run our political systems, our economic systems, our technical systems, and so on.
yeah.
What I discovered when I published that book is that there really wasn't a place in society for that discussion. The mainstream media couldn't hold it, and some people picked it up, like Gail Bradbrook at Extinction Rebellion has talked a lot about the book and about the ideas in it and so on. But
Okay.
in general, it feels like there's too much inertia, and we're not going to be, we're not in a position to make the types of radical revolutionary changes that we would need to make to prevent like the worst alternatives. So I'm since publishing that book, I've become more pessimistic, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. We're going to be in for some very crazy times, and for many people, it may be kind of like an end time. You know.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a lot of questions just with what you're saying there. It's I mean, it's scary on on many levels if you look at the sort of the ecological collapse and prospect of extinction. And I mean, I just spoke to my brother and I asked, because he's heavily involved with Extinction Rebellion, and I asked him, got any questions for Daniel? He said, well, methodologies, ways that we can process grief around what's happening to the planet. He asked me, can you ask about that? Like how we can kind of process this grief we have.
Well, in a way, it's just an acceleration and like a collective kind of. I mean, life's always based on death, and we're all mortal. We're all going to die. We kind of always put that out of our purview. Like it's not something that in our society we think about all the time. Yeah. I think in other cultures, death was seen as a more ever-present part of life, and maybe one reason that we've created this catastrophe is that we've tried to push death out of our framework, and so now it's coming back on this larger collective way. So I guess getting acquainted with that idea of finality, mortality, and then also for me there's still questions of whether there's a larger framing in which all this is happening. So I've had many experiences that I consider to be psychic or paranormal or supernatural, mystical or occult, which suggests that actually there's a much larger story. And then also there are forces that work behind the scenes that are legitimate. And also that we have powers and capacities that we have not called upon yet. So those things give me, excite me, and also give me a kind of strange kind of hope, because there may be a totally different register in which this story that we're in now is playing out. And to me, that would also accord with, some of the different ways you can understand the esoteric and religious traditions. That maybe, we're in a transitional stage, and through some type of psycho-spiritual process of evolution or transformation, we end up becoming other, something else.
Yeah, I'm fully on board with that. That's totally where I am in the sense of I see us shifting consciously, and that there is a change happening, which is part of what we are as human beings, that we're evolving and that our consciousness is upgrading.
Yeah.
That, what's been spoken about in prophecy and what's been spoken about in those traditions and myths, that we're in that age now, which you've written about, and that it's happening. And there's, for me, it's undeniable. Like, it's undeniable. We've got a way to go as a race, as a society, but there's so much happening in a level for myself and many people I know.
From an esoteric Christian viewpoint, I mean, the fundamentalism in the U.S. is very popular, and a lot of the it's kind of support that Trump has comes from far right-wing evangelical Christians who've constructed a model of a regressive model of Christianity, where God is kind of like a primitive warlord, and whoever has the power has it out of because God has given them that power, and they're deemed to be the one who holds that power. So therefore they believe that Trump, because he has the power, he's kind of the good father, like God has appointed. And for them, they've also distorted like the idea of Christ and teachings of Christ, so that if you believe in Christ, if you believe in Christ's divinity, then you're automatically saved. And so they've twisted around the whole thing in a very powerful way. The alternative idea, more the esoteric idea, is that the Gnostic Christ, the original Christ, is like a model or a template for humanity to follow, in order to, transcend, to reach a level of, spiritual consciousness or whatever. So, whatever the inner Christ means for an individual is kind of the path that one could follow at this point. For some people, that is being with Extinction Rebellion and getting arrested, taking on that danger for yourself, and confronting the system directly, whether through hunger strikes or protests. For other people, it might be as a lawyer protecting an indigenous community or trying to fight for their rights, or however one feels at this very, very extreme time. It's best for them to kind of like activate their inner Christ and follow like the path of their like conscience. That seems
Kind
to
of
be
sacred activism.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, as a child, what were you interested in?
I was interested in poetry, surrealism, avant-garde art, experimental films, games, Dungeons and Dragons, science fiction, stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm really curious about, as when we're children, what our passions are and what our loves are, how that gets expressed later on in our lives. And obviously, many people just feel like, oh, I have to get a job and I have to do what my parents say or society tells me to do, and they don't follow what their true kind of gifts and passions are. And it's been a battle in my own life. I've been through many phases and kind of working out who I am and what I'm about and what I really love and what I really want to do on this planet. And I think that's a really interesting question to kind of ask ourselves. And
yeah, well, I mean, both my parents were definitely very dedicated artists. My father was an abstract painter who, kind of chose a life of kind of voluntary poverty in a way because he didn't want to compromise. He was actually from England originally.
Oh, right.
He was lucky enough that he was able to rent a big loft when they were super cheap and hold on to it for most of his adult life. And just, it was very uncompromising. Like for him, just having the time to work and to contemplate and to make art, was totally what he cared about. If that meant having, very little in other ways, he was fine with that. And my mother was a writer and a book editor. She edited a lot of 60s radical books. She edited the book by Abbie Hoffman, Revolution for the Hell of It, in 68. She also was involved with the Beat Generation in the 50s and went out with Jack Kerouac for a while, was with him when On the Road came out, and wrote a memoir called Minor Characters about her time with the Beats. So, and both of them really had a very strong ethos of, creativity, self-expression, and, also kind of humanist values, like caring for others. So yeah, I definitely feel like all that stuff really informed my childhood and my adulthood.
Yeah. Amazing. And I mean, that explains to me why you're so prolific and you're a brilliant writer. I mean, anyway, I really love reading what you do. I wanted to ask you a slightly sort of sideways question, or in some way. The existence of extraterrestrial consciousness, intelligences, beings. What are your thoughts on that? And for example, cosmic disclosure.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's like, one of the books, actually, personally, I don't actually think that I'm very prolific, by the way. I think there are many writers who are way more prolific. I'm trying to get more prolific now. But I wrote another short book called The Occult Control System, where I was looking at the questions of UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrials. And in fact, in the 2012 book, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, I had about 100 pages in there on the alien abductions, but also on the crop circle phenomenon in England.
Yeah, okay.
Which I take, seriously. I think is a really fascinating. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I've been such an outsider, and it's allowed me to, study subjects that just get ridiculed and repressed and so on. Psychedelics were like that originally. Crop circles, you still can't really talk about without people laughing their ass
Yeah.
off at you and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are other levels of galactic intelligence. Why wouldn't there be? And that they have different ways of, communicating with us. And some of them are benevolent, and some of them are very suspicious and malignant. And but but even the question of like what reality is one that needs to be kind of thought through on a deeper level. Like we're slowly exiting the materialist Newtonian Cartesian paradigm, and we're entering this kind of like quantum post rationalist realization that there's no objective reality, that consciousness is creating the illusion of the physical world, and to some extent that we're all aspects of one consciousness that's chosen to separate itself up into all these little fragments to explore and experience its own creative possibilities, let's say. So from that perspective, that's kind of the perspective that we have to start then to make an inquiry into the phenomenon of things like aliens and extraterrestrials and crop circles. Like, what is the messaging? Why is it at the periphery or the perimeter of our consciousness? Almost begin phenomenologically. Is there an alignment between elements of a secret government and elements of some type of non-human consciousness that's expressing itself in various ways through technologies, through mind control practices? I mean, I think it's possible.
I think it's probable.
Maybe probable, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a funny one when we get into these kind of conversations, because obviously people's radar goes off because of what I call the mind control around ET presence is so deep and intense that we're just not allowed to even think about it. It's got to taboo it immediately. Little green men, all flying saucers is all nonsense, because if they were here, then we'd know about them. Someone would have a video and it would be all over the news, that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I mean,
go on.
The pictures of the crop circles are certainly openly available, and if you research it at all, you find that the really complex and extraordinary ones, it's highly unlikely that any team of human beings made them in like one night in cover of darkness. And the more spectacular ones, we haven't really been able to see a human team execute at that level of precision. And then you can begin to look at the messages, what they're saying in terms of the geometries and the imagery. And then you can begin to ask yourself if it's like a coded form of communication that's maybe meant to, awaken, certain aspects of our psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. They're such great questions to ask about crop circles, because they keep on appearing. And so have you ever personally had UFO experiences, that kind of phenomena?
Yeah, I've had several times. The most notable one was for me was in Utah. I was part of a retreat that my company had put together, and we had a mushroom ceremony the night before the retreat officially started. And during that whole night, there were two very large kind of globes of light that were hanging in the sky, much bigger than any star, and they really seemed to accompany us the whole night through the journey. And then they weren't there the next day. So yeah, that was an extraordinary one.
My personal experience is that I've had multiple experiences. My personal experience is that whoever these intelligences, beings, whatever they are attracted to conscious evolution. They are attracted to intentional gathering, and people, or let's say, when people are getting together to raise their consciousness, it appears that they're attracted to that.
Yeah, I totally think there's some truth to that, for sure.
Yeah, as if, like we have in our culture, anthropologists or whatever going to seek out, the tribes, so-called primitive tribes, and looking for, okay, what's going on here? What's the level of
Right.
civilization, etc.
It may even be different than that. It might be some type of electromagnetic phenomenon, when you have like a certain, amount of people vibrating at a certain frequency. We don't even know yet. We don't know
Oh
to what
yeah.
extent they're like, intersubjective, like to what extent, we it's our collective psyche, which is like calling in this phenomenon, or what the relationship is there. And I really liked Terence McKenna's perspective on the imagination, or actually William Blake's perspective. The imagination is the human existence in itself. And that, the imagination, is not just like we're making up things. It's like a lens through which we're looking into, deeper layers of the, morphinogenic field of consciousness.
Hmm.
I think that's a very interesting perspective.
Mm.
Thanks for reminding me about all the stuff that I think about. I wasn't thinking about it recently, and now it's nice to be reminded.
My absolute pleasure. I'm just very present with this, so it helps me when I talk to people like you to kind of assess these and evaluate these ideas and concepts, which I don't go around talking about every day, because it's a bit like you want to be like taken off to the to the woo-woo farm, because it's still like that. Although I like to bring in these conversations. It just reminded me, like a year ago at Christmas, because my dad's into this stuff, right? And at Christmas last year, we were like at a party of a friend's house, and family were there and that kind of thing. And my dad was starting to talk about like reptilians, and like, what about UFOs and all this sort of thing. And I personally, in this sort of polite company, I felt embarrassed, and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to go there. But something's changed in me, where I feel a lot more courageous and brave by having conversations, by doing this podcast, by doing all this other stuff that I'm doing, which is last year has been a big catalyst for me in getting into public speaking and that kind of thing, and speaking my truth, really. That I'm no longer afraid to talk about these things.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically what it is. Ultimately, it's just like go big or go home, basically. And so, yeah, I love that.
Life's too short not to speak your truth out.
Oh God, isn't it? Isn't
Yeah.
it? Oh, I feel like I've got a lot of catching up to do. I wanted to ask you also about your think tank.
Yeah, that's not really happening at the moment.
Okay.
We had a grant for a while, and we explored the idea. I mean, the wiki is still there, although now it's a few years out of date. But I still think it's a great project. The idea would be to create a systemic database of all of the different solutions on the different levels that we would need to implement them. The three main areas that we kind of defined were the sort of technical infrastructure areas, like the changes we would have to make in agriculture, energy, industry, waste management, and then the social changes that would be necessary to make those technical changes, which includes really radical shifts in our economic system, how we utilize resources, and how they get directed and so on, which requires a big change in our political system, how we would get potentially, obviously in theory, the internet, particularly with a blockchain based decentralized system, could allow for all sorts of alternatives to the current voting system, where instead of voting in these candidates every 4 years, people are directly and continuously involved in making decisions and learning about the decisions, or proxying their votes to those they trust more, but not having to wait many years to then change the vote. So yeah, essentially, if we were going to address these problems at scale, we would need exponential, scalable, regenerative technologies to be implemented, and we would need a new decision-making infrastructure for humanity that overcame the obstructions created by these representational democratic nation-state systems, which are pretty much out of date considering the scale of the crisis we're facing.
Okay. Wonderful. So this think tank needs funding. It needs more grants.
Yeah, that would be, sure. If anybody wants to fuel it up, I'm open to that. I'm always trying to figure out what's the best way to make use of my own limited time and resources.
Right. Yeah. So Well, anyone out there who's got money and wants to put it into a good cause, sounds like
Yeah.
your think tank could be a good place to put it.
Oh, then I mentioned, so I mentioned the social shifts we would have to make, but then that also requires a shift in consciousness, which requires like media, storytelling, narrative. I got very interested in this Italian political philosopher, Antonio Negri, who wrote a couple books with an American guy. One was called Empire, one was called Multitude. And they talked a lot about how in a post-industrial civilization like we have now, the most, when Marx was writing, he talked about, material production being the most important type of production, like the production of things, tools, sewing machines, umbrellas, or whatever. Obviously, that's still important, but what's become, more important in this type of society is, I'd say the production of subjectivity itself. That like the media and the government, institutions kind of work together to kind of manufacture consciousness, or Chomsky talks about manufacturing consent.
Oh yeah.
So people aren't aware that their subjectivity, which they're told to think is like their own, and that they're free and they can just do it, and Coke is it, all that stuff. That's actually something that's been manufactured for them, by a whole system of power and financial relations.
I'm a believer.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this author, Michael Negri, is it?
Antonio Negri and Michael Hart.
Okay.
Yeah, the best book they wrote together is Multitude. Maybe a little bit out of date now, but still has lots of really great ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see that as a reality, really, that we completely conditioned, programmed consciousness that we think is our own, but I'm waking up to that and breaking free.
Yeah, that's like a big value of the psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when when the Beats started taking it in the 50s. For them was like, oh, like this is actually a way that, because the Beats were a group of American artists and writers who sort of woke up in the 1940s, post-war period, and realized that like they were living in this programmed society where there wasn't really any consciousness present in the politics or in business. So they went on like a personal journey of excavation where they're like, well, who the hell are we? Like, what do we care about? What are, so they would do things like take drugs and sit up all night and stare each other in the eyes, just like talk and record and try to excavate, who they were, socially, sexually, spiritually, and so on. And so when they discovered the psychedelics in the 50s, they realized that these could be tools that would allow a lot of people to go through a rapid kind of deconditioning process and see how their own perceptions, differ from those that have been programmed into them by the society.
Yes, I love how you put that. It does help make sense of that movement actually, and understand it kind of contemporarily. And it's almost like that's happening on a much broader scale now with use of psychedelics, for example. But not only that, people.
Well, what's interesting right now with the mainstream psychedelic movement, I have mixed feelings about its direction, because it's, I think in a way, in order to find a mainstream, kind of approval, they've guided the movement into the direction of like, personal healing above all, and then actually even looking at these as tools for capitalist production. So microdosing is now a big movement. And the idea is that if you microdose, you're more innovative. You can, come up with new ideas for companies and products and so on. So it's been, kind of, shifted into a ideology around, supporting, kind of maybe somewhat more conscious, but still very, very capitalist oriented entrepreneurship and innovation. And in a way, the way that you sculpt or script the narrative around psychedelics is very, very powerful, because then people take that in as their set and setting. Then when they have the experience, they're only looking, their anticipation is, innovation or personal healing or insight, maybe not really going to that deeper structural level of kind of deprogramming, deconstruction, recognizing that the whole, social system we have is, based on patriarchal domination and so on, and that actually the effort needs to be a deeper one, which is actually something to her great credit that Gail Bradbrook from Extinction Rebellion has been talking about, that there really needs to be kind of like almost like a psychedelic political spiritual revolution.
Bring it on, I say. Bring it on. And also kind of relatable to that in some ways is, you know, going outside the realm of psychedelics, just into kind of personal, spiritual, visionary experiences through methodologies, let's say holotropic breath work or whatever is your zen that, you know, lights up your boat. And, you know, that the information, the understanding is coming in for so many more people now, that you can alter your experience through these methodologies and have awakenings, have insights come to you. And yeah, it's very exciting as well to think about that and talk about that, and also distribute that information that, yes, look, this is an option for you, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Quetzalcoatl, and that as well, that consciousness, that entity that you spoke about, and, you know, like, for example, I look through different channels on YouTube and I'm finding whole programs and shows devoted to channeling, for example. And this is getting more exposure and more interest. And it's almost like in this time that we're getting to a point where if you know, work on yourself, open up yourself, and raise your consciousness, you can begin to kind of receive information, right? And this like morphogenetic side of things, this is very exciting. And it's also like the personal sovereignty that, you know, we can actually, you know, get the direct transmission rather than needing something else, you know, someone else or something else to guide us or show us that we actually have that within us. And I feel like you're speaking about Quetzalcoatl, and that transmission is very enabling in that way, that actually we can all tap into, you know, if we empty ourselves, we can all tap into this.
Sure. I mean, yeah, the only, you know, big issue is, you know, how do you know what you're tapping into? I mean, you know, and people lose their discernment, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, essentially, I mean, I agree. I really like this guy, Tom Roberts, who wrote a book called The Psychedelic Future of the Mind. And in that book, he talked about how the rediscovery of psychedelics over the last, you know, in this period is akin to what he calls about the second Reformation. So the first Reformation was in like with Martin Luther, and they translated the Bible from Latin into the common languages. So up until that point, only the priests knew what the word of God was, and they would just tell people, you know, what to believe. And so suddenly everybody could read the word of God for themselves, and like that sort of led to the English Civil War and so on. So now, you know, we've been able to read the word of God, quote unquote, for ourselves, and now we can actually have that experience directly for ourselves. So that's like a second Reformation.
Yes, absolutely. And this brings me to the idea about shamanism and like contemporary shamanism, being each one of us becoming a shaman in our own way, in, for example, following the synchronicities. So when I walk around now, particularly when I see a dog or when I see a bird, I'm like asking, what am I learning? What am I seeing? What's it showing me? How can I learn from this? What's the message? And kind of like noticing everything that the universe is communicating with us, that right. Is an intelligence, and like, can I receive this? Am I open to this? It's like, I love that. It's almost like a game where I'm always just trying to be more aware and trying to be more open, and not, you know, break through the kind of autopilot program of this sort of reality that, you know, programming, and just go, well, wait, what am I being shown now? What am I being shown now? What am I being shown now? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, one thing is, I mean, I guess in these indigenous communities, it's not necessarily that everybody would become a shaman. You know, there would be a smaller percentage of people who, you know, maybe 1 out of 20 or something, who would feel a calling to go deeper, you know, in that sense. But those people who had that calling were recognized as when they went through the initiatory process, as very important figures in the community who could heal and provide vision and so on. Obviously in our society, like the modern civilization is almost the first one to totally do away with any type of initiation as a personal experience of the transcendent or the invisible realms or whatever. So we don't know what to do with our people who have shamanic dispensations. They're still kind of like on the outskirts, although it seems as if the culture is moving in the direction of recognizing there's something vital here. But then also we have to deal with our slightly, now, because we started out as secularists, materialists for the most part, and then we have these awakenings into the spiritual and the psychic. That can also be very, very confusing. And also, we can be naive about that, just as people are naive about the channelings, even with synchronicities. I mean, once you've kind of like activated yourself and understood that there are these weavings of synchronicities, that there is kind of a larger story of the psyche that's unfolding. You can then get a little bit lost in that too, because not all synchronicities are good. Like you can have something pop up as a synchronicity, and then you follow that path, and it turns out it's almost like your subconscious has prepared like a trap for you or something. So as we go through this kind of awakening process into a cult or mystical understanding of the nature of reality, we then also have to become more discerning. I think that's why it's too much for most people. They don't want to deal with that. They just want to send their kids to school and be able to get decent health care and live a good life, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. But there are other people in a society who have a different role and a different kind of dharma in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I have a couple of more questions. Do you have any morning rituals?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I mean, I write in the mornings usually, so that's usually my ritual.
Okay, so writing.
Yeah.
Do you have, as a writer, do you have a particular modus operandi? What helps you with your creativity? Do you suffer blocks as well? And I'm curious about those things.
Yeah, well, there are different ways. I mean, I write a lot of crap, so the block would be getting out the crap, and then over time looking at the crap and then trying to redo it. So it's like writing requires a lot of revision. So it's really just putting time into it. And usually the best way for me to do it is to wake up in the morning and either go to a cafe and kind of try to approach it while my mind is still relatively empty. Although that so that's been my habit until recently.
How many hours a week do you write on average?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, it really depends on the level of inspiration and what I'm working on and stuff like that.
Okay. Have you ever thought about writing fiction?
Yes, of course. But before I wrote Breaking Open the Head, which was published, I was 35. I wrote 2 novels that luckily did not get published. They weren't very good. But I'm still interested in narrative writing. And right now I've been exploring doing some screenwriting and having fun with that.
Interesting. Okay.
In fact, I even put a play up on Amazon. I wrote a play kind of set at a Burning Man-like festival during an ecological crash.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
What's that called?
That's called Son of Darkness.
Son of Darkness.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's up on Amazon.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so any budding?
Actually, I don't know if it's been a while since I looked at it. I don't know if I actually gave it that title. Let me see. But yeah, so it's there.
Okay, so anyone wants to produce that play?
Yeah, totally. It was my first effort, so it has maybe too many characters in it.
Okay.
But
how many characters are there?
Sorry, Deep Zero is what the play is called.
Deep Zero. Okay.
Yeah.
How many characters are there roughly?
I think there's like 20 characters or something. But if I ever get around to redoing it, I'll prune that back.
And how long do you feel the play is?
It's a full-length play. We did a reading in New York, and it had actually seemed to work very well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that like an hour long, 2 hour long play?
Yeah, probably an hour. Yeah.
An hour long. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I'd like to have a look at that myself. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Because I'm an actor as well, and
Oh, cool.
So Interesting. What's your favorite book?
Well, if you want to produce it in London, I have some leads who might help. So give it a read.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
My favorite
Great.
book is Tropic of Capricorn by Henry Miller.
Okay.
And To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf is one of my favorite books. The Ever-Present Origin by Jean Gebser. And An Outline of Esoteric Science by Rudolf Steiner. And The Duino Elegies by Rainer Maria Rilke. And Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. That's probably some of my favorite books.
Okay. I'll be making a note of those and having a look. And favorite film?
Favorite film? That's a good question. I don't think I have one favorite film. I mean, I like different directors a lot. Like, I mean, the first film that came to mind is 2001. I don't know if that's actually my favorite film, but I do like it. I really loved Arrival. I thought that was a really brilliant recent science fiction film.
That's the one with this huge kind of
Yes.
object that appears and
that the aliens actually have a teaching that's about the relationship between like language and symbolic structures to time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good film. Yeah. Any more questions? What are you reading right now?
I'm going back to reread some things I've read before. Actually, I just read a really amazing book. I'm not totally finished with it, called Authors of the Impossible by Jeffrey Kripal, where he's looking at really the most extraordinary students of paranormal and psychic phenomena from the 19th and 20th century. And he's been, through that book, introducing me to some writers that I didn't know who are, kind of like bringing psychic phenomena up to a level of very intelligent discourse and expression. I think is really important. But then I'm also rereading. I'm actually very interested in this writer who gets kind of castigated a lot as being an inspiration for the right wing, Julia Savola, who wrote a book called Revolt Against the Modern World, and books on Buddhism and Tantra and Eros and so on, alchemy. I think he's actually a fairly, he's pretty amazing. And also I'm going back to relook at Ouspensky's book on Gurdjieff, In Search of the Miraculous.
Ouspensky. Okay. Amazing. I'm going to be taking notes of all these books. So, questions. Thoughts on creativity?
Thoughts on creativity?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to answer a question like that.
I know.
Yeah.
How do you tap into the creative? For example, when you want to write, is there something? Do you have anything that you do or you aspire to in terms of being more creative with your writing?
I mean, sometimes what I do is I reread pieces from writers that I really, really love. I mean, Henry Miller is one of my favorite prose stylists. So when I feel a little stuck, I might go back and read a few pages from Henry Miller, just because I really appreciate kind of the exaltation that he has in his prose, and wish my own writing was more like that.
Okay, useful. I have to look into Henry Miller because I don't know. So, are you going to write any more plays?
Well, I'm more interested in seeing if I could, throw my hat in the ring around, screenplays, films, or maybe series. Like I think it'd be really fun to work in that field a little bit. But I very well could write another play. I'm really not sure right now.
Do you ever use a writing coach?
I never use a writing coach.
No. Okay.
But my mother is actually one of the best writers that I know, and an editor. So I have gone to her in certain cases and gotten really, really powerful feedback from her.
Very useful. Yeah, amazing. How can people follow you?
I'm on all of the usual thingamabobs, like Instagram, and Facebook, and Twitter. So they just look me up and follow me right away.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Oh.
So the event's coming up in London.
Yes.
You're speaking, is it at Alternatives?
Yes.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And what else are you doing?
I think I'm giving a talk at the College of Psychic Studies.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. And do you know those dates offhand?
I do not know them
Oh, that's
offhand.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. I can put them in the show notes.
Hold on. You'll probably figure it out. Oh. It looks like, uh-oh, I hope I can make it. Okay. Aha. Okay, hold on. We're getting there. March 2nd at Alternatives.
Okay, brilliant. March 2nd. Right. Good. Well, I shall be there and inviting my friend. Oh, yeah. Question. Have you come across David Wilcock? Have you read him?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thoughts on David Wilcock and what he talks about?
I think he's largely a kind of con artist or charlatan.
Really?
Well, I tend to think that. I mean, there's some, probably some information sprinkled in there, but I mean, I've tried to understand, what his relationship is to kind of like factual evidence and so on. Like, I don't know. I'm just, I'm not so convinced by him.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't. What do you think?
I love his books. I love his work. Yeah. I find him fascinating because of that.
Yeah. Maybe I need to look deeper.
Yeah, how he goes into the paranormal stuff and looks at all the research that's kind of been sort of not censored, but not in the mainstream because maybe it's the Russians that did it or the Chinese and all that kind of stuff, and how that's been going on for decades and decades and decades, and it may have been happening in CIA programs, whatever else, but it was never published, all that kind of thing, and how that all kind of he brings that synthesis together of all of those studies and information and goes, well, actually, this is going on, this is going on.
I mean, he kind of tilted towards being a Trump supporter and kind of like talking about the deep state conspiracy and that Trump is the only one who can save us and so on. For me, that adds to my general sense of suspicion around him, both as a political, kind of ideologue, as somebody, where he is on the ideological spectrum. And then also I often find that I don't really trust, how he uses facts and evidence and research in his work. It feels kind of ungrounded and, yeah, but I mean, I may have missed some nuances there. I should probably take another look.
Okay. I mean, I've never heard him like praise Trump. I've heard him speak about Trump in sort of more in sort of, okay, he was chosen by this military group who decided we need to change things and we need to rest ourselves from all this dark stuff that's happening, in terms of like child trafficking and all of that, which is going on kind of behind the scenes that is starting to get looked at. I haven't heard him kind of praise Trump or like, yes, you must, it's not, yeah.
He's got, I'm looking at his update from 4/13/2019. Trump's squad will expose the deep state and shadow government.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, anybody who's, making a claim like that is totally bonkers and not to be taken seriously.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
That is fair enough, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Any major regrets?
Yeah, but I don't think I'm going to talk about them right now.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you and learning from you. And I just look forward to more and reading more of your.
Thanks. It's great to meet you. And I'll meet you in person in a few weeks.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll thank you so much for this chat, and
sure.
I'll let you know when I've edited it and got it up there.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and have a wonderful stay in Vienna and rest of day and everything.
Thank you. You too. Have a good time.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Daniel. Okay. Bye-bye.